Ever notice the way your dog stares at you like they have a secret only you can uncover? James muttered under his breath as he turned the key in his front door, exhausted from a long day at work. The sun had already dipped behind the houses on his quiet suburban street, casting a golden glow through the windows, but it did little to lift his mood. As the door swung open, Luna, his golden retriever, sprang forward with a burst of energy that made him stumble slightly, her paws tapping insistently on the hardwood floor. Her tail wagged furiously, but there was something more than just excitement in her eyes, a sense of urgency that James couldn't quite place. He bent down to scratch behind her ears, trying to calm himself and her at the same time, but Luna's gaze darted quickly toward the living room, then back at him, as if trying to lead him somewhere. "What is it, girl?" he asked, half amused, half puzzled. He had seen this playful enthusiasm 1,000 times before, yet tonight felt different. Luna's body was tense, her ears perked, and every so often, she let out a short, sharp bark that seemed to punctuate her silent insistence. James set his briefcase down and followed her as she trotted to the center of the room, circling a spot near the coffee table, glancing back to ensure he was watching. He chuckled softly, shaking his head at what he assumed was another one of her quirky behaviors. "You're not trying to warn me about anything, are you?" he said, trying to match her energy, but there was a nagging feeling in his chest he couldn't ignore. Luna's movements were deliberate, almost strategic, and she repeated the pattern, pacing in a small loop before sitting abruptly and staring at him with an intensity that made him pause. He leaned against the doorway, observing her, realizing he had never really paid attention to the subtle ways she communicated her moods or feelings beyond tail wags and playful jumps. Tonight, her behavior suggested something more, something important that required his focus. He crouched down to meet her at eye level, noticing the way her golden fur glimmered under the warm living room light, and the way her eyes seemed almost human in their insistence. James felt a strange mix of curiosity and concern. There was a silent message being delivered, a signal that he could sense but not yet fully understand. Luna stood up suddenly, nudged his hand with her nose, and then walked a few steps toward the kitchen, stopping to look back at him as though waiting for him to follow. The feeling that something was about to unfold made his heart rate quicken slightly, despite the ordinary setting of his home. He dropped his bag, trailing Luna to the kitchen doorway, and noticed how she paused, ears twitching toward a faint sound he hadn't yet registered. James froze, realizing he might be missing the significance of the moment, and that Luna's unusual excitement was more than just playful behavior. Her gaze met his again, unwavering and expectant, and he understood instinctively that she was trying to tell him something crucial. The mix of familiarity and suspense left him standing in the middle of his home, fully alert, heart pounding, as if the day's stress had shifted into a new, unpredictable energy. The simple act of greeting him at the door had transformed into a silent, urgent communication that demanded his attention, bridging the gap between human and dog in a way he had never fully appreciated before, making him realize that the ordinary could hold extraordinary meaning if only one paused to observe carefully. James took a deep breath, trying to shake off the lingering fatigue from his workday as he followed Luna through the kitchen, her paws softly patting against the cool tile floor. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint scent of dinner leftovers, yet James could hardly notice anything around him because his focus was entirely on Luna and the sense of purpose in her movements. She paused by the counter, glancing back at him with those intelligent, pleading eyes, and then nudged his hand gently with her nose as if insisting he pay attention to something he might otherwise overlook. James crouched down slightly, examining her expression more closely, noting the slight tension in her body and the way her ears twitched at every subtle sound in the room. It was unusual for Luna to display such intensity without an obvious reason, and a small spark of unease flickered in James's chest, mixed with admiration for her attentiveness. He reached out and scratched behind her ears, murmuring softly, attempting to reassure both of them, yet she remained alert, her head turning repeatedly toward the dining area. James noticed a faint clatter, the kind that would usually go unnoticed amidst the normal hum of household activity, and his eyes widened as he realized Luna had been signaling this entire time. She barked softly, a sound that was more controlled than her typical playful bark, drawing his attention to the edge of the dining table where a small object had shifted slightly, creating the noise that Luna had reacted to. James bent closer, understanding beginning to dawn on him, and a wave of appreciation for Luna's perceptiveness washed over him. He had often underestimated how finely tuned her senses were, how she could notice the smallest changes in her environment and interpret them in ways that humans frequently missed. Luna wagged her tail slightly, sensing his change in attention, and James allowed himself a small smile, realizing the bond they shared extended far beyond simple companionship. He could feel the subtle communication in every tilt of her head, every quiet paw step, every focused gaze, and it struck him how much she had been trying to teach him about patience, observation, and trust. Moving carefully toward the living room with Luna at his side, James felt a renewed sense of curiosity and attentiveness, aware now that their interactions were layered with meaning he had only begun to decipher. The ordinary evening had transformed into an intricate dance of understanding, one where James learned to slow down, to observe, and to recognize the silent messages woven into Luna's every action, forging a deeper connection that went beyond words and became an unspoken conversation of loyalty, intuition, and mutual respect. James stepped cautiously into the living room, his eyes scanning the familiar space with a heightened awareness that he had never experienced before. Luna padded softly beside him, her body alert, tail held in a careful balance between excitement and seriousness, and her nose lifted slightly, capturing scents that James could not perceive. He noticed how every movement she made was intentional, guiding him subtly toward the corner near the window where the sunlight had faded into shadows, revealing small changes in the room that he had ignored countless times before. James crouched again, observing how Luna shifted her weight and how her eyes flicked from the floor to his face, almost as if checking for his understanding. He realized that her persistence was not playful, nor was it random. There was a pattern, a message woven through her behavior that demanded patience and interpretation. A quiet rustle caught his attention, and he glanced down at the rug where a slight indentation suggested that something had been displaced earlier, an event that might have been insignificant to a casual observer but significant to Luna. Her ears pricked up, and she nudged his leg gently, leading him to notice a small trail of movement that traced back to the kitchen, a subtle cue that connected the dots in a way only she could perceive fully. James's heart began to race, not with fear, but with anticipation and wonder, as he realized the depth of Luna's awareness and her desire to communicate with him. He followed her lead carefully, learning to match his pace to her silent guidance, recognizing the nuances in her expressions, the slight shifts in her stance, the soft patting of her paws that directed his attention without words. Every step brought a new layer of understanding, teaching him about vigilance, empathy, and the delicate interplay between human perception and animal instinct. Luna paused once more, sitting squarely and looking directly at him, her eyes conveying a clarity that needed no explanation, her entire posture radiating trust and expectation. James nodded slightly, acknowledging the lesson embedded in her actions, feeling a mix of respect and gratitude for the canine companion who had consistently shown him patience, intuition, and loyalty. The evening light dimmed further, casting elongated shadows across the room, yet within those shadows, a connection had formed, one that transcended words and relied on shared observation and silent communication, and James felt an enduring sense of clarity and attentiveness that promised to change the way he engaged with Luna and with the world around him. James felt the tension in the room shift as he followed Luna into the hallway, her paws moving deliberately on the wooden floor, each step a silent instruction that guided him toward details he had previously ignored. The warm glow from the ceiling light cast gentle shadows across the walls, highlighting small imperfections and subtle movements that would normally escape his notice, yet tonight every shadow seemed to tell a story that Luna had been attentive to all along. She paused in front of the staircase, tilting her head slightly and letting out a soft, insistent whine, then glanced back at James as if confirming he understood her urgency. He crouched down to meet her gaze, noting how her eyes shone with a mixture of expectation and quiet determination, and he could not help but feel a growing sense of curiosity and responsibility to interpret her signals accurately. James's hand hovered above her head for a moment, hesitating to interrupt the silent conversation unfolding between them, and then he followed her as she continued toward the study, her movements precise and purposeful. The air was filled with the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the subtle creak of the floorboards beneath their steps, sounds that had previously faded into the background, but now carried significance as Luna reacted to each one with small, deliberate gestures. James observed how she paused at the corner of the desk, nudged a chair slightly, and then turned to him, her body language a mix of insistence and patience, guiding him to notice the faint tilt of an object on the desk that seemed inconsequential until paired with Luna's attentive stance. A slow realization washed over him, highlighting how much he had underestimated her awareness, the depth of her ability to perceive shifts in their environment that humans often overlooked. He crouched to examine the desk more closely, recognizing that Luna's behavior was teaching him to be more observant, more mindful, and more responsive to subtleties that could easily go unnoticed. Every tilt of her head, every subtle shift of her body, and every quiet look she cast in his direction communicated layers of meaning that required patience and interpretation. James felt a growing admiration for her intelligence and a sense of gratitude for her persistent guidance, understanding that this was more than a simple interaction, it was a lesson in attention, awareness, and trust. He took a deep breath, feeling a profound connection to Luna that extended beyond words, realizing that her dedication to communicating through her actions created an unspoken dialogue that enriched his understanding of their shared space and deepened the bond between human and dog in a way that felt both natural and extraordinary. James froze for a moment, his eyes tracing Luna's movements as she padded purposefully toward the small nook near the window, her paws barely making a sound on the polished hardwood floor. The evening light had deepened into a soft amber, casting long, shifting shadows that danced across the walls, and he could feel a quiet tension settling in the air, a sensation that seemed to amplify Luna's alertness. She paused abruptly, turning her head to look at James, her eyes wide and filled with an unmistakable urgency, and then glanced back toward a stack of books on the corner table, her nose twitching as if picking up a faint, almost imperceptible scent. James took a careful step forward, studying her every gesture, noting how her body was slightly lowered, muscles coiled but not tense, a posture of readiness that conveyed silent communication and intent. He bent slightly to level his gaze with hers, feeling the unspoken message she carried, a lesson in awareness that was both subtle and insistent. Luna walked a few more steps, pausing each time to check that he was following, then nudged the edge of the rug with her paw, causing it to shift slightly, revealing a minor imbalance that might have gone unnoticed without her attention. James's heart quickened with realization, understanding that Luna's actions were deliberate and that she had been attempting to guide him toward noticing these small but meaningful details. He reached down to scratch behind her ears, murmuring encouragement and admiration, and she responded with a soft, satisfied whine, a sound that seemed to affirm their shared understanding. James began to appreciate the depth of Luna's perception, how every tilt of her head, every soft step, and every focused glance was part of a rich tapestry of communication that transcended words. He moved slowly around the nook, observing how she paused at the edge of the bookshelf, then turned to him once more, her gaze demanding recognition and attentiveness, and he realized that their bond was strengthened not merely by companionship, but by this ongoing, silent dialogue that required patience, focus, and empathy. The simple evening had evolved into a profound exercise in connection and trust, where James learned to align his senses with hers, to honor the quiet intelligence and dedication she displayed, and to recognize the lessons embedded in her deliberate actions, deepening his respect and love for his loyal, insightful companion. James followed Luna as she moved toward the far corner of the study, her paws barely making a sound on the smooth wooden floor, each step measured and intentional. The glow from the lamp on the desk cast soft, warm light across the room, illuminating the subtle shifts in the arrangement of objects that James had never noticed before. Luna paused, her body slightly lowered, tail gently swishing, and her ears perked forward, signaling that she had detected something important. James crouched down to meet her gaze, feeling the silent insistence in her eyes, and he realized that this was more than playful behavior, it was a deliberate attempt to guide him. He leaned closer, examining the small details she had been drawing his attention to, the tilt of the picture frame, the slight gap in the curtain, the faint movement of a stack of papers. Every subtle cue was part of a larger message that required his full awareness. James's heart began to beat faster, a mixture of curiosity and awe filling him, as he began to appreciate how much he had underestimated Luna's perceptiveness. She nudged the papers with her nose, then stepped back to look at him, as if confirming that he understood what she was pointing out. James carefully adjusted the papers and observed how Luna's ears twitched at each tiny sound, her eyes scanning the room with a precision he could barely comprehend. It was a lesson in patience, focus, and trust, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude for her guidance. He took a slow breath, allowing himself to be fully present in the moment, noting how her behavior taught him to notice the small, often overlooked details that could carry significant meaning. The quiet whine she emitted was not one of frustration, but of encouragement, prompting him to continue paying attention and to follow her subtle cues. James began to see the room through her perspective, recognizing the patterns and connections that she had been signaling all along. It was a revelation, a new way of understanding their shared environment and the unspoken language they communicated in. Luna moved closer to the desk, sitting attentively and looking up at him with a mixture of pride and expectation, and James realized that this was a partnership built on observation, empathy, and mutual respect. He felt a renewed sense of connection, understanding that Luna's guidance was not merely about alerting him to physical changes in the room, but about teaching him to be more present, more aware, and more attuned to the subtleties of life around him. As he knelt beside her, feeling the warmth of her presence, James understood that the lessons embedded in her actions would linger long after this evening, shaping the way he perceived his home, his surroundings, and the bond they shared in ways that went far beyond words, creating a quiet, profound understanding that strengthened their relationship in a way that was both immediate and enduring. James stood quietly, letting Luna lead him to the corner of the living room where the subtle arrangement of furniture and objects had gone mostly unnoticed until now. The evening had grown calmer, the sky outside darkening into deep indigo with the first hints of stars, and the soft glow from the table lamp cast gentle pools of light that illuminated the subtle shifts in the room. Luna paused, her body low, ears pricked forward, and tail swaying slightly as she nudged a small, previously overlooked object with her nose, then stepped back to ensure that James was observing her guidance. He bent closer, noticing the faint tilt of the book on the side table, the tiny scuff mark on the floor near the window, and the subtle gap in the blinds, each detail a signal that Luna had meticulously drawn his attention to. A sense of realization began to unfold within him, a mixture of admiration for her perceptiveness and a dawning understanding that her actions were a language of their own, requiring patience, focus, and interpretation. He watched as she paced slowly, eyes darting to each corner, then back at him, her movements deliberate, and he followed, feeling a growing respect for the way she orchestrated their interaction. Each step she took seemed to guide him not just to physical details, but to a heightened awareness of his environment, teaching him the importance of observation, attentiveness, and trust. Luna paused again, sitting upright with a small, quiet whine that drew his gaze directly to her, and James crouched to meet her eyes, feeling the depth of her intent. He began to notice the subtle cues in her posture, the slight wag of her tail that indicated encouragement, the tilt of her head that invited comprehension, and the careful placement of her paws that directed him toward insight he might have otherwise missed. It became clear to him that their interaction was a sophisticated exchange, a silent conversation where understanding required attentiveness and empathy. James felt a wave of gratitude and awe, recognizing the quiet brilliance in Luna's actions and the patience she had demonstrated all evening. Her dedication to guiding him, the clarity of her silent communication, and the persistent insistence on his awareness illuminated the bond they shared in a new light. The simple act of her leading him through the room had transformed into a profound lesson in perception, patience, and respect, one that bridged the gap between human and dog in a way that words could not capture, leaving James with an enduring sense of connection, admiration, and insight into the intelligence and loyalty of his loyal companion as he moved carefully alongside her, attuned to every subtle signal and ready to follow her lead with full attention and understanding. James finally paused in the center of the living room, feeling the weight of the evening settle around him, a quiet stillness punctuated only by the soft rustle of Luna's fur as she shifted beside him. The lamp on the side table cast a gentle glow, highlighting the details of the room that he had been so focused on with Luna's guidance, and he could now see the subtle interactions between the objects, the way shadows fell differently, and how each movement, no matter how small, could change his perception entirely. Luna looked up at him, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of satisfaction and expectation, and James felt a rush of understanding wash over him, the clarity of her intention finally aligning with his awareness. He bent down slowly, running a hand along her back, feeling the warmth and solidity of her presence, and he could sense the bond between them strengthening with each shared moment of observation and silent communication. Her tail wagged slightly, a subtle rhythm that matched the quiet pulse of his own heartbeat, and he realized that her actions had not merely been a series of random behaviors but a carefully orchestrated lesson in attentiveness and trust. The faint creak of the floorboard beneath his weight reminded him of the ordinary world outside this moment, yet within this space, a profound connection had been forged, one built on patience, empathy, and a mutual recognition of the unseen details that shape everyday life. Luna nudged his hand gently with her nose, then returned to her careful watch over the room, and James noticed how every tilt of her head, every subtle glance, and every measured step communicated layers of meaning that transcended verbal explanation. He began to feel a deep respect for the intelligence and dedication she exhibited, understanding that her actions reflected not only loyalty but also an acute awareness of his state of mind and environment. As he moved closer to the sofa, Luna stayed beside him, alert yet calm, guiding him with a quiet insistence that emphasized the value of shared attention and mindful observation. James's heart swelled with gratitude and admiration, realizing that the evening had become more than a sequence of events. It was a revelation about the ways in which animals can teach humans to be more present, more perceptive, and more attuned to the subtle signals that often go unnoticed. The gentle rhythm of their movements together, the unspoken conversation, and the awareness of each other's focus created a serene sense of harmony that lingered in the room, a lasting reminder of the depth of connection possible between human and dog, and James knew that the lessons he had learned from Luna this evening would influence the way he perceived his surroundings, his home, and his loyal companion for years to come. As the night settled fully over James's home, a serene quiet enveloped the living room, broken only by the soft ticking of the wall clock and the subtle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Luna lay at his feet, her head resting lightly on his shoe, eyes still bright and attentive, occasionally lifting to meet his gaze with a depth of understanding that transcended words. James sank into the sofa, reflecting on the evening and the profound lesson embedded in every movement, glance, and gentle nudge Luna had offered him. He realized that her behavior had not been random or merely playful, but a consistent demonstration of awareness, vigilance, and a silent form of communication that required patience, observation, and empathy to fully comprehend. Each subtle shift in her posture, every careful paw placement, and even the slight changes in her breathing had carried meaning, a language of loyalty and trust that he had only begun to decode. James marveled at how she had guided him not by forcing attention but by inviting it, teaching him to slow down, notice the environment, and recognize the intricate web of signals that often go unnoticed in daily life. He understood that this shared attentiveness strengthened their bond, transforming ordinary routines into exercises in connection and mindfulness. Luna's unwavering focus had reminded him of the importance of presence, patience, and respect for the world around him, as well as for the creatures who shared it with him. He reached down to stroke her fur, feeling the soft warmth and solid reassurance of her body, and a deep sense of gratitude and admiration filled him. In her silent instruction, James discovered a mirror for his own emotions, learning how attentiveness and care could deepen understanding, not only between human and dog but in the broader context of relationships and interactions with others. The night had become more than a moment of domestic tranquility, it had evolved into a lesson on perception, empathy, and the power of observation, where the ordinary details of home life gained significance through shared awareness. James felt a lasting sense of connection, a recognition that the attentive presence of Luna had illuminated aspects of life that he had often overlooked. Her steadfast guidance and thoughtful cues had nurtured a sense of insight and reflection, teaching him to value patience, subtle communication,